بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. Here we're going to go on to talk about Babu Fara'id al-Wudu'i wa Sunanihi wa Fada'ilihi. We're going to talk about the chapter of wudu, and we're going to discuss the obligatory acts, the sunnah acts, and the virtuous acts. And the word used in the text is fara'id al-wudu, which means the obligatory acts. And according to the Malikiyah, when we use the word fard, it has the same meaning as wajib as well. And we also use the word was sunanihi, talking about the sunnahs, wa fada'ilihi, and also for the usage of the word fada'il or fadila, we also have the word mustahab or mandub, which all entail the same meaning. As for the meaning of the fara'id, when we say an obligatory act in wudu, the definition of fard here is ما يتوقف عليه صحة العبادة. It refers to those things which have to be included in the wudu in order for the wudu to be sound. So when we say the fard of wudu, we don't mean the meaning of fard or wajib, that if a person were to leave it, he takes a sin for it. But the meaning of fard in the chapter of Fiqh, when we're talking about the individual acts or the singular or particular acts of an obligatory act such as wudu, then what we're referring to is the actions which have to be performed in order for that ibadah to be sound. In other words, when we say, for example, that washing the face is fard, it means that if this limb is not washed, then the wudu will not be sound. Does not technically mean that if a person was not to wash his face in wudu, he takes a sin for it. It simply means that his wudu will not be sound. So in general, it means those elements that must be there in order for this particular ibadah, which is wudu in this case, to be sound. And that's why the ulama say huwa ma yatawaqqafu alayhi sihhat al-ibadah. And then when we move on to define the sunnah acts and the fada'ili, the sunnah acts and the fada'il acts, the ulama of the Maliki have many different technical or have addressed this issue with many different terminologies. But the easiest definition is a definition mentioned by al-Adawi, one of the Maliki scholars, that the sunnah are those things that ma talabahu ash-shari' wa akkada amrahu وَعَظُمَ قَدْرَهُ وَكَثُرَ أَجْرُهُ. They are those things that are requested by the Sharia, are recommended by the Sharia, and are emphasized, and the rewards are very great. وَلَمْ يَدُلَّ دَلِيلٌ عَلَى وُجُوبِهِ. And there is no proof from the Sharia that these things are obligatory. So this is what we mean when we're referring to sunnah. They are those things that the Sharia has requested and has stressed the emphasis of practicing and doing such actions are reap great reward. But there's no proof in the Sharia that these things are considered obligatory. And the fadila acts are those things, وَالْفَدِيلَةُ مَا طَلَبَهُ الشَّارِعُ وَخَفَّفَ أَمْرَهُ وَلَمْ يُؤَكِّدْهُ. They are those things that the Sharia has requested to do. Walakin, the difference between that and the sunnah is that there's not a heavy emphasis. It's emphasized, but there's not a heavy emphasis. And also, there's no proof from the Sharia that it is obligatory. So that's what we're generally referring to when we talk about the fara'id al-wudu wa sunanihi wa fada'ilihi. According to the Iraqi scholars of the Maliki method in the past, they never used to distinguish between the sunnah and the fada'ilihi. They used to just say that everything that is contrary to fard is sunnah. or mustahab, whatever you want to call it. All of it is whatever is not considered obligatory automatically becomes sunnah. And so the Iraqi scholars never distinguish between sunnah and fadila. They just considered everything mustahab or sunnah as all one term. So everything that wasn't fard in wudu was considered a sunnah, without distinguishing between mustahab and sunnah. So the first thing that the author mentions, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, فَأَمَّا فَرَائِدُ الْوُدُوءِ سَبْعَةٌ فَسَبْعَةٌ. He says, the fara'id al-wudu فَسَبْعَةٌ. The fara'id of wudu are 7. The first one he mentions is an-niyyatu 'inda ghasl al-wajhi. The first one he mentions here is to have a niyyah 'inda ghasl al-wajhi. Making the intention that a person is making wudu an obligatory wudu. For the beginner, the simplest way to make a proper niyyah is just to intend that you're making an obligatory wudu. Or even more simpler than that, a person should just have the idea to enter the state of purity, or to remove himself from the state of not being in wudu. So when a person is making wudu, then the intention that they should have for the beginner, which is simple and enough and covers all issues, is to make the intention that I'm making wudu in order to enter the state of purity. And so he says, an-niyatu 'inda ghasl al-wajhi. He says, an-niyatu, but when 'inda ghasl al-wajhi? Making niyyah at the time of washing the face. And why do they say niyyah at the time of washing the face? Because washing the face is the first obligatory act. So when you go to make wudu, you're going to do 3 sunnahs before you even make your obligatory act, because you're going to wash your hands, wash your nose, and wash your mouth. Then you're going to wash your face after that, and washing your face is the first obligatory act. This is where the niyyah should be done. Although in some of the commentaries on al-Risala by Ibn Abi Zayd, it's going to mention that it is recommended that a person make his niyyah from the beginning of the wudu, but he should have that he should keep that intention up until he washes his face. So that's recommended, but it's not necessary. So it's recommended that a person at the beginning of his wudu, when he starts washing his hands, to keep that intention, or to be more specific, to make the intention at the beginning when washing the hands, and when washing the face, have that same intention present. But it is not sufficient for a person to make an intention to make wudu at the time of washing the hands, and not to have it at the time of washing the face. So that's why he says, an-niyatu 'inda ghasl al-wajhi. So that's how a person makes a niyyah. And then the next one that he mentions is وَغَسْلُ الْوَجْهِ, washing the face. And when you wash the face, a person has to be very careful that they wash everything in regards to the face. So technically speaking, the face, according to the Maliki school, is what begins from the normal hairline. So it doesn't matter if a person has a receding hairline or a person has hair on their forehead. The washing of the face begins from the normal hairline, meaning in most normal cases, wherever the hairline begins, then that is where it is obligatory to start washing your face, from all the way down to the chin bone. Just under the chin bone that has to be washed, and that's the length in terms of the face, what has to be washed. And in terms of the width, it has to be from the air pin to air pin. What do we mean by air pin? If you look by the sideburns of your face, you see at the beginning of your ear, there's this little pin, which in Arabic they call al-watad, because it sticks out a little bit. Then this is the point where a person has to make sure that even when they're washing their face, that they include this watad, this pin of the ear, that they include it while they're washing their face. Also, people should make sure that when they're washing their face, that they wipe over their eyebrows good, right? That they wipe over their eyebrows so that water gets under the eyebrows. That for those who have a mustache, to make sure that they get their mustache. So in general, you have to make sure that you wash all the face, and that your hand goes over every part. And for those concerning the beard, he's going to mention that later on down the line in this lesson, inshallah. So that's how a person would go about washing their face in wudu. Also, another point I would like to mention about washing your face: when you wash your face, you have to make sure that you don't tuck your lips in, meaning that your lips should be left normal, like they would if you had a blank expression, because the outer part of your lips are considered part of your face. So if you were to tuck your lips in and wash your face, you wouldn't actually have wudu, because you didn't wash all of the parts of the face. Then he moves on to say, وَغَسْلُ الْيَدَيْنِ إِلَى الْمِرْفَقَيْنِ. Here he's referring to washing the arms. غَسْلُ الْيَدَيْنِ, washing the arms, إِلَى الْمِرْفَقَيْنِ, up to the elbow joints. But we should translate it as including the elbow joints, right? Because it doesn't mean wash up until the elbow joint, so that it's not included. The elbow joint is included, and so that has to be washed as well during wudu. And so when a person is washing, they have to make sure that they get the whole arm, including the hands as well. Don't make the mistake that a lot of people make, where they think that washing the hands at the beginning of the wudu, because it's sunnah, is sufficient. When it says washing the hands up until the elbows, it means that you must wash the hands again during the obligatory washing. Everything has to be washed. You have to pass your hands over everything, including your nails, all the way up until your elbows. And that's what he means by وَغَسْلُ الْيَدَيْنِ إِلَى الْمِرْفَقَيْنِ, up into the elbow joint. Then he moves on to mention وَمَسْحُ جَمِيعِ الرَّأْسِ, wiping over all of the head. And that can be done by placing the two hands together and wiping from the front of the head, starting from the hairline all the way back to the nape of the neck where the hairline ends. But it is sufficient to wipe down past the part of the bump on the back of the skull. So the back of the skull, where if a person was to run his hands to the back of his head, he'd feel the bump. Once you get down to the bottom of that and you pass that, that's actually considered the head, and you will have wiped over your whole entire head. As for those who have long hair, then what they do is they pass their hands over their head, and then they can bunch. If they want to, they can pull their head over. They can pull their hair over their shoulder and run their hands down, to the bottom, doing the rest of the hair, and that's obligatory. So if you have long hair hanging, then you have to make sure that you wipe all the way down to the bottom. Then he goes on to mention وَغَسْلُ الرِّجْلَيْنِ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ. وَغَسْلُ الرِّجْلَيْنِ means to wash the feet, إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ, and al-Ka'bayn means to the ankle bones, but we're going to translate it as before, including the ankle bones. And the ankle bones are the two bones that stick out of the side of the feet, which connect the leg to the foot. All of this has to be washed during wudu. It is only mustahab in our madhab to wipe between the toes, but as Ibn Abi Zayd mentions in his al-Risā'ah, that it's better to wipe between the toes because there's more certainty that you've gotten everything. And so when you wash your feet, you should make sure that you cover all parts of the water, especially the back of the foot. Sometimes where you may assume that water has been penetrated, but it actually hasn't. And so that's the general meaning of washing the feet. Wal-fawr. Wal-fawr in our madhab, this is something that exists in our madhab. Al-fawr refers to doing the wudu continuously, which would be a general translation of fawr. But what we mean technically is to do the wudu continuously in a manner to do the wudu continuously so that you finish the wudu before your limbs actually dry. I'll give you an example. For example, if you were making wudu and the phone rang, and you've only finished half your wudu, meaning you only washed your arms and you didn't wash your feet, and you went to answer the phone rang, and you talked on the phone. If you were to hang up that phone and your limbs were still wet, technically speaking, because your limbs are still wet, then it means that you're still in the state of wudu. Then you can go back to the washroom and continue completing your wudu. Because technically speaking, according to fiqh, al-fawr, to do your wudu continuously means to complete it before any of the other limbs were to dry. So if you were to get off the phone and your arms are still wet, then technically speaking, you're still in the state of wudu. But if you were to hang up that phone and your limbs were all dry, then you must start your wudu over because you did not fulfill the obligation of fawr. So the reality of this obligation will determine whether or not you have to continue, whether or not you have to restart your wudu, or whether or not you can continue. So that's what we mean by fawr. We also have another obligatory act which is specific to the Maliki method, which is what tadliku. At-tadliku means to wipe. Technical term means imrarul yad al-udwi. It means the passing of the palm of the hand over the limb when making wudu. So be careful. The reason why I'm giving you the technical term, because in the section of wudu, when we use the word dalk or tadlik, it means specifically in wudu to use the palm, to pass the palm of the hand over the limb while washing. What's the technical application of this technical term, or the meaning of this obligatory act? It means that when you're making wudu, in order for you to have a sound wudu, you must make sure that when you're making wudu, that it's the palm of your hand that you're using in order to wipe over the area. So for example, when you're washing the face, you have to use the palm. You have to make sure that you use the inner, what we mean by the palm of the hand, the inner side of the hand, and it wouldn't be sufficient to use your arm, for example. Or a more practical example, when you're in the masjid, sometimes you see people, they will put their feet under the water, and then they will use their feet to wash the other feet. In our madhab, according to the Malikiyah, dalk means to use the palm of the hand. So technically speaking, that wouldn't be sufficient. So you have to use your hand even to wash your feet. So that's the meaning of tadliku. So when a person is making wudu, they have to make sure that when they're doing their face and their hands, that you get every area of the obligatory limb. So the author mentioned فَهَذِهِ سَبْعَةٌ. So what we just mentioned so far is sab'ah. But then he says, لكن يجب عليك في غسل وجهك أن تخلل شعر لحيتك إن كان شعر اللحية خفيفا تظهر البشرة تحته وإن كان كثيفا فلا يجب عليك تخليلها وكذلك يجب عليك في غسل يديك أن تخلل أصابعك على المشهور. Now the author is going to mention that these are the 7 standard obligatory acts, but there are other obligatory acts. And so he says, lakin, but it is also obligatory, يجب عليك في غسل وجهك, it is also obligatory on you that when you're washing your face, أن تخلل شعر لحيتك إن كان شعر اللحية خفيفا. It is also obligatory for you to pass your fingers through your beard if your beard is thin. So what he's referring to here is he's telling you that a person who has a thin beard, and he's going to define the thin beard as تظهر البشرة تحته. Basharatu means the skin. If a person has a beard which the skin can be seen under the beard, for example, a person who has a stringy beard, although they have a beard, you can see that you can still see their skin from under their beard. They are recommended to take their fingers when they're washing their face and rub through the hair. And the reason for that is because since the skin is still visible, then it's still obligatory for him to reach the skin when washing his face. Because the fact that his skin is still present means that the ruling of the obligation of washing the actual face is still present. So he's going to take his fingers and run them through his beard during his washing, and this is obligatory. So that's the rule of a person whose beard is thin, meaning that his skin shows from underneath his beard. Now he's going to mention the rule of if a person has a thick beard. So he says, وَإِن كَانَ كَثِيفًا, كَثِيفًا means thick, فَلَا يَجِبُ عَلَيْكَ تَخْلِيلُهَا. And he says, if your beard is thick, then it is not obligatory on you to run your fingers through your beard. The author here doesn't mention what a person's supposed to do. He just mentions that a person with a thick beard doesn't have to make what we call takhlil, which is running the fingers to the actual surface of the skin. In the books of fiqh, it's going to mention that a person who has a thick beard, all they have to do is they have to run their they have to run their hands, the palm of their hands, down over their beard, but they don't make takhlil. They just run their hands over so that it gets wet. But they don't make takhlil. For a person who has a thick beard, if they make what we mentioned, takhlil, if they run their fingers through their beard, this is disliked. So if a person's beard is thick enough to where he cannot see the skin under his beard, then he just has to make sure that when he's washing his face, that he runs his hands over his beard. He also mentions another one of the obligatory acts, وَكَذَلِكَ يَجِبُ عَلَيْكَ فِي غَسْلِ يَدَيْكَ أَن تُخَلِّلَ أَصَابِعَكَ عَلَى الْمَشْهُورِ. According to the mashhur opinion, it is also obligatory during wudu to make takhlil of the fingers. Making takhlil of the fingers means to run the fingers of the right hand and the left hand between each other. The easiest way, the proper way of doing this, for example, is to take if you take the left hand, the palm of the left hand, and sit it on top of the right hand, and then you open up the fingers of both hands, then you run your fingers through them. Right? So basically what you're doing is you take the palm, you can take your right hand, face it towards the ground so that the palm is on the ground. The palm side of the right hand is on the ground, then spread the fingers. Then put the left hand on top so that the palm of the left hand is on top of the right hand, and just run your fingers, connect them like a web, and run your fingers through them. And do the same thing on the left hand. But do not take the two sides. For example, do not take the inside palm of the right hand and the inside palm of the left hand and put them together and do takhlil like that. That's considered disliked. What I mentioned to you previously is the proper way of making what we call takhlil, and this is also obligatory in wudu. So that's the summary of the obligatory acts in wudu, and then the author goes on to mention the sunnah acts of wudu. And he says, وَأَمَّا السُّنَنُ الْوُدُوءِ فَثَمَانِيَةٌ غَسْلُ الْيَدَيْنِ أَوَّلًا إِلَى الْكُوعَيْنِ. He says the first one is washing the hands, أَوَّلًا إِلَى الْكُوعَيْنِ. Washing the hands first up until the wrist. So here he gives you a brief understanding, just telling you to wash the hands first, meaning that the first thing you do during your wudu is to wash your hands up until the wrist. The complete way of doing that is mentioned in other books of fiqh, is to wash the right hand 3 times first before placing your hand in the bucket, for example. So for example, if you were making wudu out of a bucket, then you would take a scoop and then take the water out with the scoop, wash the right hand 3 times, and then wash the left hand 3 times with the intention of performing a worship. Because in our madhab, the reason for washing the hands 3 times is actually unknown. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ practicing this wasn't done because his hands were dirty, because we've seen even when his hands were clean, he also did it. So the reason for it is unknown, and so it's a form of worship. And because it's a form of worship, then we do it with the intention that it's a worship. So we're washing our hands 3 times, not necessarily because it's to clean the hands. It's because it's part of wudu, so it's a worship, and that's how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did it, and Allah knows best. So in our madhab, you're going to wash the right hand 3 times, and then you're going to wash the left hand 3 times with the intention of performing a worship. And then he mentions wal-madmadatu. Wal-madmadatu means to wash out the mouth 3 times. Then you're going to wash out the mouth 3 times. But in order to get the reward of the sunnah, there is certain things that have to be done in order for it to actually be technically called madmada, meaning to technically be called washing the mouth during wudu. That the person puts the water in their mouth. What do you mean by puts the water in the mouth? They put their hands under the water, take a scoop and put it in their mouth. That's one of the conditions. So if a person was to put his mouth in, for example, on a fountain and just let the water fall into his mouth, he wouldn't get the reward of madmada. The second condition is that a person has to swish the water around in his mouth. So if a person were to put water in his mouth and not swish it around and just let it come out of his mouth, then he wouldn't get the reward of the sunnah. The third condition is that it has to be spit out. What do we mean by it has to be spit out? For example, if a person was to fulfill the other 2 conditions that we mentioned, and then he was just to open his mouth and let the water fall out of his mouth, he wouldn't get the sunnah. So what do we mean by spit it out? We just mean by pushing it out of his mouth. So these are the 3 conditions that have to be met in order for a person to get the reward of madmada. Also, what they mean by the fact that the water has to be spit out is that it cannot be swallowed. So if a person was washing and swishing the water around in their mouth and they were to swallow it, they wouldn't get the reward of the sunnah. Then wal-istinshaqu. Wal-istinshaqu means to put, to inhale the water into the nose. So inhaling the water into the nose up until at least the nose bridge. So the condition of getting the sunnah for that is to actually inhale the water. So a person who didn't inhale the water, meaning he just pushed it in his nose and let it and then blew it out, he wouldn't get the reward of the madmada. But there's a difference between a person who's fasting and a person who's not fasting. A person who's fasting should only blow up to the nostrils of the nose, but not the nose bridge bone, because if he does that, then possibly the water might pass down through his nose and then go into his throat, and then his fasting becomes nullified. So a person who's fasting should only make sure that they're sucking up enough just enough to get to the front nostrils. But a person who's not fasting, then they should suck it up just until the top of the nose bridge, but not enough that it's going to make them choke so that the water goes down to the throat. So that's wal-istinshaqu. Then we're going to move on to wal-istintharu. Wal-istintharu means to blow the water out. And in order to get the sunnah of that, a person must, when they're blowing the water out of the nose, to place the thumb and the index finger on the nose bridge with the left hand and blow out. The Prophet ﷺ ordered the people not to blow their nose like a donkey. And the ulama said, what does it mean by blow their nose like a donkey? It means that they don't just put the water in their nose and then just blow out like a donkey, but instead the proper adab of doing it is to put your hand on the left, to put your thumb and your index finger on the nose bridge and blow out, because this will help to bring out whatever's axis is on the inside, and if anything comes out, then the person can push it off with his fingers and then wash his hands. So he also mentions in the text the definition of wal-istinthar, and he says وَهُوَ جَذْبُ الْمَاءِ مِنَ الْأَنْفِ. وَهُوَ جَذْبُ الْمَاءِ مِنَ الْأَنْفِ. جَذْبُ الْمَاءِ مِنَ الْأَنْفِ means the pushing of the water out of the nose, contrary to just letting it fall out of the nose. Then he's going to mention the other sunnah, وَرَدُّ مَسِّ الرَّأْسِ, the returning of wiping over the head. So as we mentioned before, the first wiping over the head is obligatory, and so the second, the returning of wiping over the head is a sunnah. And the way that a woman can wipe over the back of the return of her head is after she wipes down to the front, she can flip her hair from the back over her head and pass her hands returning back all the way down to the bottom of her hair. So she can do that by flipping her hair over her head from the back to the front and then passing her hands all the way down to the bottom of her hair. Then the next one that he mentions is mashul udhunaini dhahirihima wa batinihima. It says to wiping the ears. So wiping the ears in wudu after you wash your head. ظَاهِرِهِمَا وَبَاطِنِهِمَا, the apparent side of them and the hidden side of them. What do they mean by the apparent side of them? They actually mean the back of the ears and not the front. And the reason why they say that is because actually when a baby is born, the ears are tucked in. So what is actually behind the ear is actually what is seen first. And when they say the inside of the ear, they actually mean the part of the ear that we can see now that the ear is actually open. So wiping both the inside and the outside is considered sunnah, and that can be done by placing the index fingers in the flaps of the ears and then running the thumbs on the back of the ears. On the part, behind the apparent part of the ears. But it is not sunnah to stick your fingers inside of the hole or the canal of the ear, just the flaps. Then he mentions وَتَجْدِيدُ الْمَاءِ لَهُمَا. Also, after you finish wiping the head, it is sunnah for a person to stick his fingers into the water before wiping the ears. He shouldn't take any water up with him when he's wiping the ears, but just dip his fingers into the bucket and then wiping the ears. That's what it means by tajdidul ma, renewing the water for wiping the ears. Lahuma means for the wiping of both the ears. وَتَرْتِيبُ بَيْنَ فَرَائِدِهِ. And the last sunnah is doing the tartib, is doing the fard actions in order. So doing the fard actions in order, which means to wash the face first, then to wash the arms, then to wipe the head, and then to wash the feet, is considered sunnah only in our madhab. For other madhabs, it's considered obligatory, and the difference of opinion is based on the ayah of wudhu. Some of them said that the fact that it's mentioned in order is obligatory, but for the Malikis, they didn't consider it obligatory, but it's considered a sunnah, and thus we should always try to make our wudu in perfect order. And so those are the 8 sunnahs that he mentions, and then he's going to go on to mention the fada'iluhu. وَأَمَّا فَضَائِلُهُ فَسَبْعَةٌ. He numbers them as sab'ah, but when we go into the more advanced books of Malikiya, we see that there's much more. But what he's mentioning here are the general ones that are the most important. So the first one he mentions is at-tasmiyatu. At-tasmiyatu, we say Bismillah, but we don't say Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim according to the sound opinion in the Malikiyah. We just say Bismillah Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Now the common question comes up, well, what about the washrooms? According to the Maliki madhab, it's disliked to mention the name of Allah in a place where impurities usually be, even if the place is clean. Alright, so even if the place is clean, so generally, technically speaking, that would be our washrooms today. So in most cases, people are making wudu in their washrooms. So when they're making wudu in their washroom, then they can just say Bismillah inside of their heart, and inshallah that should be sufficient. But they shouldn't pronounce Bismillah on their tongue because they're in the washrooms. And what else is recommended? وَمَوْدِعُ الطَّاهِرِ. A مَوْدِعُ الطَّاهِرِ is that you do it in a place that is pure. Meaning not inside of the washroom or a place where there's no impurities, right? But in our case, that's difficult because in modern times we're living in houses, and so this is a mustahab that maybe some people will be able to complete, and maybe some people won't be able to complete. The second one is qillatul ma'i bila haddin, using a bit of water, but bila haddin. Bila haddin means that we're not going to specify a set amount of water. Although the Prophet ﷺ was known for using a specific amount of water, that was specific for him. But for example, to be more specific, a person who's 7 foot tall or 7 feet tall compared to a person who's 5 foot tall or 5 feet tall do not need the same amount of water. So using the least amount of water is going to be specific for each person. What does it mean not to use too much water? When you're making wudu, we're not talking about the fact that the water is running. We're talking about the amount of water that you use on your limbs to make wudu. So the way to avoid this is that when a person is making wudu, even when they're washing their face, put your hand under the tap and take water with one hand only. Preferably the right hand. So you're going to take water with the right hand, put it on the face, then wash the face. So same thing when it goes to washing the limbs. Use a cup full or a handful of water and put it on the limb. But do not do like the misinformed do by placing their limb under the water when they're making wudu. For example, a person is making wudu with his arms, and so he puts his arms under the water, and all that water is running on his arm while he's washing over it. This is considered disliked, very disliked. So one of them, as we just mentioned, that the mustahab is using a little bit of water. وَوَضْعُ الْإِنَاءِ عَلَى الْيَمِينِ إِنْ كَانَ مَفْتُوحًا. If you were making water out of a bucket or a pitcher, if that bucket is open, meaning it's something in which your hand can fit inside of it, then put it on the right side, because taking water with your right hand and applying it on the limb to make wudu is mustahab. But if the pitcher is closed, then it's better to put it on the left side, because you're going to pick it up with the left hand and pour the water in with the right hand. That's why it says وَوَضْعُ الْإِنَاءِ, by putting the ina, the vase or the bucket, ala yamini, on the right, under a condition. In kana maftuhan, if it is open. Why did you say if it is open? Because if it was closed, then you would do the opposite, meaning you'd put it on the left side. Then the other one that after that he mentions وَغَسْلَةُ الثَّانِيَةُ وَالثَّالِثَةُ إِذَا أَوْعَبَ بِالْأُولَى. He says washing the second time and the third time, and this is according to the sound opinion. Some of the ulama say that washing the second time is a sunnah and washing the third time is a fadila. But what he mentions here, he says وَغَسْلَةُ الثَّانِيَةُ, the second washing. For example, washing your face the first time is mustahab, is obligatory. The second one, according to the sound opinion, as he mentions here, is a thaniyatu. Washing the second and the third time is a mustahab. But pay attention that he uses the word al-ghaslu, the washing, because in our madhab, which I think is across the board in all madhabs, we do not wipe. When it comes to the issues that are wiped, we don't do it a second and a third time. For example, we don't wipe over that. We don't wipe over the head twice going the same direction. Right? So the second, or when it comes to wiping the ears, we just wipe the ears once. When it comes to when he's talking about washing, he's using the specific word al-ghaslatu. So washing the second and the third time is considered a sunnah. And also, we don't have a third wiping over the head. We have one wiping and a second wiping. We don't have a third wiping. So وَغَسْلَةُ الثَّانِيَةُ وَالثَّالِثَةُ. And he adds a very important point. إِذَا أَوْعَبَ بِالْأُولَى, if he was to do a complete wash in the first washing. So here he's saying if you were to wash your face completely the first time, then the second one and the third time is sunnah. But if you didn't wash all of your face in the first washing because you missed something, then you have to make sure that when you wash it again, you wash it with the intention that it's with the understanding that's obligatory, because you did not complete the obligatory act. You cannot wash it with the intention that it's only mustahab. That's why it says أَوْ عَبَ بِالْأُولَى. أَوْ عَبَ بِالْأُولَى means that he covers all of it in the first washing. Because if he doesn't cover all of it in the first washing, then the obligation of washing the entire face still remains. Then he says, وَالْبَدْءُ بِمُقَدِّمِ الرَّأْسِ. وَالْبَدْءُ بِالْمُقَدِّمِ الرَّأْسِ means starting the wiping of the head from the front. So when you're wiping the head, starting from the front is a sunnah. So for example, technically speaking, if you started the obligatory wiping of the head from the back and did the sunnah starting from the front, it would be sound. But it's sunnah to start wiping from the front of the head and then returning from the back. So technically speaking, we have three different issues of fiqh in regards to wiping over the head. The first wiping over the head is fard, as we mentioned, or wajib, same meaning. Then the returning, meaning the second wiping, the returning wiping is sunnah. Then starting the actual wiping from the actual wiping of the head, or the initial wiping of the head from the front and not from the back, is considered a mustahab. وَالسِّوَاكُ وَاللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ. Then he mentions وَالسِّوَاكُ, using the miswak. Notice that in our madhab we mentioned that the miswak in the chapter of Wudhu. In our madhab it is mustahab to use the miswak during wudu, and it is disliked to use the miswak inside the masjid. One of the reasons why it's recommended to do it during wudu is because in most cases when a person uses the miswak, his gums are going to bleed, and so the blood is considered an impurity, and so after he uses miswak, then he should be washing out his mouth. So the place where you should be using the miswak is at the beginning of wudu, before you rinse out your mouth, so that when you go to rinsing your mouth, you can remove any blood or any of the excess that is in the mouth. Or if a person wants to, he can wash his mouth one time, and then he can use the miswak and then wash it the second and the third time, so any of the remains is gone. And then he says, Wallahu a'lam, and Allah knows best. And that is the end of the lesson concerning the obligatory acts, the sunnah acts, and the mustahab acts, or the fada'il, the same thing, the virtuous acts. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.